medical engineer.
I think I'll be the president.
I'm going to be Secretary of State.
World-class chef, right here.
Race car driver. Artist. Paleontologist.
Film director.
Surgeon. Teacher. Scientist.
Olympian.
I'm going to be the boss.
And here is the Writer's Almanac for Thursday, the 26th of September, 2013. It's the birthday of George Gershwin, the composer, born Brooklyn, 1898, who, at the age of 19, along with his childhood friend Irving Caesar, wrote a song called Swanee, which Al Jolson made into a huge hit, and George Gershwin was on his way. It's the birthday of T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot, born into a prominent Unitarian family in St. Louis in 1888. The man who wrote, "Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach," from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, 1915. It was on this day, 1957, the musical West Side Story opened on Broadway after a great deal of trouble. The choreographer Jerome Robbins had the idea 10 years before of a retelling of the Romeo and Juliet story set in the streets of New York, and he got Arthur Lawrence to write the story and Leonard Bernstein to write the music. And Lawrence wrote a draft of a musical he called East Side Story, in which there was a Catholic gang, the Jets, and a Jewish gang, the Emeralds, and it was set during the Easter Passover season. They put that aside, and then in 1955, Lawrence and Bernstein were working in Hollywood. They were sitting by a swimming pool at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and they were talking about the news, including gang violence in Los Angeles between whites and Hispanics. So they decided to change the story, have a Polish-American named Tony and a Puerto Rican named Maria, and East Side Story became West Side Story. They had a hard time getting producers interested. They thought the story was too depressing, too much like opera. They couldn't find a lyricist. Finally, they got Stephen Sondheim, who was in his mid-20s, and he convinced a friend of his, Hal Prince, to be the producer. It was hard to find actors. They needed leads who were good singers, who were actors, who could dance, and who looked like teenagers. And then there was a problem with the billing. Jerome Robbins insisted on being the director. He also wanted a credit that the show was, quote, conceived by Jerome Robbins. So the creators were barely speaking to each other when it opened. In general, West Side Story got pretty good reviews when it opened, but that year all of the major Tony Awards went to The Music Man, a little musical about a small town in Iowa. Here's a poem for today by Kirsten Dierking, Sailing on Lake Superior. Before us now, the edge of the earth, below us the nearly endless cold, around us nothing but shimmering water, the miles of empty and sparkling blue. For a few hours the sail fills on toward infinity. Shadows of our delicate bodies ebb and flow across the deck of our delicate boat. What if the beautiful days, the good and pacific temperate moments weren't just lovely, but everything? What if I could let it fall away in the wake, that ache to extract meaning from vastness? Let this suffice, the ease of thinking it all goes on, whether we're here to see it or not, the splashing waves, the sun-tipped gulls arcing across the radiant world. Sailing on Lake Superior, a poem by Kirsten Dierking from Northern Oracle, published by Spout Press and used by permission here on the Writer's Almanac, supported by the Poetry Foundation. You can turn your iPhone or Android into a virtual poetry library with the Poetry Foundation's Poetry app. Available to everyone online at poetryfoundation.org/mobile. Produced by Joy Biles with assistance from Kathy Roach. Be well, do good work, and keep in touch.
I think Jim's the most handsome guy in the whole world.
Her smile just kind of warms me inside.
We asked Jim and Lisa what they love most about each other in Close-Up with Fluoride.
Her teeth, they're really beautiful.
I love a bright, beautiful smile.
I like fluoride. I like white teeth, and freshness is a plus.
Close-Up makes me feel all fresh, especially if I'm going to be kissing Jim.
Close-Up helps me get close to Lisa.
Close-Up toothpaste with Fluoride. Don't you owe it to each other?
Sure thing. We'll have them on Tuesday. Wow, the biggest Haribo Gourmet order ever.
How big?
Very big. We've got to ramp up production. All hands on deck. We need everybody's favorite flavors and colors. Red raspberry. Lemon. Give us all you got. We're on it. What are we, Team Haribo?
The fruitiest and the chewiest!
Hey, how are we going to deliver them?
We can't drive.
Sounds like Mr. CEO needs an MON.
Welcome back to Studio 26 on this Thursday morning. And is it wrong for a grown man to hate that little boy? I don't really hate him, but I I understand what the the ad execs were trying to do. But to me, I get tired of the stereotype. You're not a success until you're wearing a business suit, and that kid's wearing a business suit, and there's a little boy to me that wants to make fun of him. Now, I'm not a bully, you know that. But it just bothers me that the only way you could be a success is if you wear a suit. Some of the most successful people in this world didn't become a success by wearing a suit. Matter of fact, a few of them got down and dirty. I mean, can you imagine a farmer doing that? Or, of course, there's a family legend that some of my distant relatives on my dad's side, that they were so wealthy that when they farmed, they wore three-piece suits. One of my great-great-grandfathers, but I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, that little kid bothers me for some reason. I think it's more of just the fact that he was set up to do that ad. I'm sure he's probably a nice kid after all. Well, anyway, still to come on this program. I need a little bit of music here to get through this. We'll have news from the Associated Press in just a moment, as well as news of the weird, popular tweets of the day, along with the song of the day and what's coming up on TV tonight. Right now, though, we're going to switch things over to APM and get the latest market news right after this Parks and Recreation meeting.
A story of fake pharmaceuticals. From APM in New York, I'm David Brancaccio with the global perspective on business and economics. At a conference in London today, they're taking on the growing problem of counterfeit medicine. Millions of lives are put at risk by knockoff drugs, and it's a problem afflicting the U.S. and Europe as well as the developing world. From London, Marketplace's Stephen Beard reports.
The World Health Organization claims that counterfeit medicine is now a $75 billion a year industry. It estimates that up to 10% of the medical drugs sold around the world are fake. In poor countries, it could be as much as 50%. Professor of Medicine Martin McKee is taking part in today's meeting. He told the BBC that this illicit trade poses a major threat to human health.
You might be taking drugs that don't cure the condition you have, and if it's a life-threatening condition, you might die. Secondly, you might be taking drugs that are themselves toxic, and the ingredients in them may kill you.
McKee says the boom in internet sales of medicine has fueled the fake drug industry. The anti-impotence remedy Viagra sold online is believed to be the most counterfeited treatment. But he also blames globalization. He says long and complicated supply chains make it easier for fake drugs to get into the system. In London, I'm Stephen Beard for Marketplace.
The Financial Times and Wall Street Journal are reporting today that banking giant J.P. Morgan Chase is in talks to settle with authorities all of its issues related to the abuse of mortgage securities for $11 billion. Yes, that's billion with a B as in boy. That's quite a fine. If that is the final settlement, it would be 2.5 times what BP paid after the Gulf oil spill. Now let's check some other numbers. The key stock index in Shanghai, China fell 1.9% overnight. The Nikkei in Japan went the other way, up 1.2%. The FT 100 in London is down 0.1%. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are all up at the moment. Nike comes out with its quarterly profits and losses later today, and expectations are high. The athletic clothes company, whose stock was just added to the Dow Jones Industrial Average, will show a 24% jump in earnings year over year if the forecasts are right. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman has more.
Nike may only be an athletic apparel company, says consultant David Howitt, but it stands in for an important segment of American business.
You're getting exposure to Converse and Jack Purcell that are owned by Nike, casual to very sports specific. So that allows the Dow to sort of represent iconic consumer brand at its best.
But is Nike's performance a good indicator of how fast the global economy is running? Not really, says Brian McGough at Hedgeye Risk Management.
It's sports, right? It's sports and it's being active, and generally speaking, that's a part of the consumer spending world that grows ahead of global GDP.
Nike's sales outpace the economy in part because consumers from Boston to Brasilia will spend more than they can afford on the latest swoosh-adorned sneaker. It's about image, identity, and aspiration, not just about the shoes. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
San Antonio, Texas is among the cities that has an $8,000 garbage can, smart trash compactors that signal when they're full using solar power, pays for itself in 6 years through saved fuel since the trucks don't have to come by as often. This is just one example that government can use data to do more things than spy. Marketplace's economics guy Chris Farrell has been thinking more deeply about this. Morning, Chris.
Good morning, David. And I feel a little bit like Steve Martin, talking about government and productivity. I can just, hear the listeners rolling their eyes.
Like airline food, jumbo shrimp. It sometimes has that ring.
It really does. But here's the thing. Government is sitting on a mountain of big data. And by the way, I don't mean the spying agencies, okay? I'm talking about the welfare agencies, the housing agencies. I mean, they have enormous amounts of data. So what if there was more sharing of information and data? What might be the implications for government productivity? It might not be an oxymoron anymore.
And it's not just a what if. Some cities right now are trying some of this.
Anybody that worked in the private sector and has worked with the introduction of technology has dealt with this issue about, okay, we have this technology, but you got a division over here and a division over there. And in order to take advantage of this technology, they have to work together. And it's really hard because some people are going to lose their jobs, but that's where the productivity promise comes. So I was kind of intrigued by what the city of Buffalo has been doing. They started this collaborative program. So they forced a bunch of city departments to work together. They also worked with nonprofit agencies, and they collected all this data. And then they look at a neighborhood and they say, this is a neighborhood that has a lot of problems in terms of streetlight repair and pothole filling. And they concentrate those resources at one moment in time in order to deal with the residents. It just wasn't one thing here, wasn't one thing there.
Now, there's a built-in irony here, Chris, right? Because to get these kinds of efficiencies, you got to spend some money to perhaps ultimately save money, and a lot of budgets are under attack.
So there's a lot of ways people are trying to figure this out, but this is where cities need to be focusing more of their resources as they think about the competition among the states. I think this is the next competitive frontier when it comes to state and local governments in this globally competitive economy.
Marketplace's economics maven Chris Farrell, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, David.
And before we go, a 1,500-square-foot bungalow, attached garage in Aberdeen, Washington, built in 1923. The online site Zillow says it's worth $74,508, but it's on the market for $500,000. Why the spread? Well, the late Nirvana demigod Kurt Cobain once lived there. His mom is trying to sell it. In New York, I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
This is AP News Minute. In Minnesota, leaders of the nation's largest